The House of Three Nevers. A man I once met at a party, yes, a friend, I assure you, not me, was drawn to a house in the forest, surrounded by hedgehogs and deer, and in line with its fairy tale setting, it promised to tell him his fate. It was called the House of Three Nevers, and he entered and considered it his. A welcoming note on the table proposed that he follow the rule of being admitted as a liveried servant in a nearby baronial pile. And the birds were all for his going, but he was as dogged against. He'd never set foot in that mansion, or he'd suffer a long living death. But never is a challenge to fortune, and the note contained its own spell. So for 35 years and longer he was attached to that beautiful hall, as a footman and butler, a steward, then head of estates and all staff, as if the note had magical knowledge, and pulled him to an inevitable end. In a cupboard beneath the staircase was a sketchbook of countryside scenes, which kindled his passion for beauty, and he took it wherever he could, drawing squirrels as they gobbled on acorns, or owls flapping by in the dusk. He'd never abandon his treescape, its creatures were core to his life, but never shrugs off any shackle, and the landscape soon taught him its role, when he was sent into town by his master, and yet felt the urge to draw. And while buried in buildings and chatter, the sketches poured out of his mind, of foxes and badgers and kestrels, because art knew best where to thrive. From the start of his life in that cottage, there was something at the edge of his eye, which beckoned and sought his attention, and he ignored it as long as he dared, till one day a healer examined it, and warned him in the solemnest terms that he must never inspect it too closely, or he'd regret it for the rest of his days. But never resists such a promise, and the speck decided to move, growing larger and always more itchy, till he swiveled and looked at it hard, and his job and the wildlife departed, replaced by an almighty shock of dazzle and incomprehension, which defined him till he took his last breath. Did the House of Three Nevers redeem him, or lead to ineluctable doom? How often must never be summoned before its lessons are finally learned? Never and never and never foretold that his wishes would fail, and when the forest at last grew over, his tracks disappeared in the soil.